Today, we will deal with Kant's classification of judgments and the Copernican revolution. Starting the first topic, that is classification of judgments. According to Kant, there are two kinds of judgments, A. Analytic and the other is synthetic. Now, analytical judgments can be defined as a proposition is said to be analytic when its predicate is already contained in the connotation of the subject. In simpler words, we say that a proposition is analytic when the predicate is already contained in the subject. For example, all bodies are extended in nature. Now, if we understand the meaning of the term material bodies, whose connotation was taken by three rationalists, that is, Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz, to be extension, in that case, certainly the predicate extended is already contained in the subject term. So, we can simply say that analytical judgments or analytic judgments simply explicate the meanings of the terms involved and they do not add anything new to our knowledge. To give you another example and a rather famous one, I would say bachelors are unmarried men. So here, all the things that we have mentioned above would apply to this example as well, that it is an analytic judgment which simply explains the meaning of the term involved and it does not add anything new to our knowledge, or in other words, it is an analytic judgment where the predicate, that is the unmarried men, is already contained in the subject, that is bachelors. Now coming to the synthetic judgments. Now according to Kant, a synthetic proposition is one in which the predicate does not belong to the subject either as its part or as a whole. For example, material bodies are heavy. Here, whether a body is heavy or not is known through experience. So in a way, this is adding something new to our existing knowledge. Again, a proposition is said to be a priori when it is independent of any experience whatsoever. So in a way, necessity and strict universality are the two criteria of a priori propositions, and both of these criteria are inseparable in nature. By strict universality, it is meant that it is true in all possible worlds. So now we come to a posteriori propositions and a priori propositions. The former are those propositions which are possible through experience, and the latter are those propositions which stem from pure reason or pure understanding and have nothing to do with experience. As a result, they are valid independently of any experience whatsoever. On the other hand, like we mentioned, a posteriori propositions are derived from experience. And because they are derived from experience, they therefore require experience for their validation. For most of the empiricists, a priori and the analytic propositions and a posteriori and synthetic propositions are identical in nature. But for Kant, synthetic propositions, instead of being a posteriori, may be a priori. For the empiricists in general, they are absurd and self-contradictory and nonsensical in nature. But for Kant, however, he says synthetic propositions or synthetic a priori propositions rather are most significant in scientific cognition and are found in mathematics and physics. Since the time of Kant, it is now accepted that a good deal of successful solution depends on a precise and a meaningful statement of question. Kant therefore stated that knowledge for him always meant scientific knowledge, the clearest example of which he says is found only in mathematics and physics and no other subject. In other words, he is basically saying that an analysis of knowledge in mathematics and physics reveals that it consists of synthetic a priori judgments. Now coming to the next topic, that is Copernican revolution. So, to tell you a little bit about the history of this, Copernicus was faced with a complete stalemate in astronomy, which was at that time based on Ptolemy's assumptions. Copernicus, therefore, by a bold thrust of thought, effected a revolution in the branch of science or astronomy. And why do we say that? Is because instead of assuming that the earth is the center of the universe, he stated that, or he assumed that, the sun is the center of the universe. And as a result, it would be fair to say that with his complete reversal in the standpoint, astronomy since then has advanced by leaps and bounds. Now, why are we discussing Copernican when we are talking about Kant? The reason is a similar reversal in the ordinary standpoint concerning the status of objects would make philosophy progressive is what was believed by Kant. He said, instead of mind approaching the objects, we have to assume that the objects must approach the mind to be known at all. In other words, he quotes, reason must approach nature not as a pupil but as a judge. This is basically saying that before Kant, it was commonly believed that mind approaches the objects. So, it is the mind which goes to the objects, and through that we come to knowledge. Now, with Kant, the difference came that instead of mind, it is the objects which approach the mind. And why do they approach the mind? They approach the mind to be known at all in the first place. So, he says we have to assume that the mind lays down the conditions for the objects to become the objects of knowledge. Unless objects conform to these preconditions, they will not be the objects for human knowing, they will not be known at all, and they will not become the objects of knowledge. But since, as we discussed, it is a revolutionary step which was taken by Kant because prior to him, none of the thinkers were thinking on similar lines, so criticism was bound to follow. The criticism against the Kant's Copernican revolution says, many critics have raised objections against the use of the terms and the Copernican revolution. It is pointed out that instead of establishing a heliocentric standpoint, Kant has really tried to re-establish a Ptolemy's way of thinking. We shall find that it is a fact that Kant sought to show that the mind makes the nature. In other words, mind is the lawgiver to all objects. Thus, the criticism says, instead of showing the unimportance of the earth and its inhabitants, that is, we all people, Kant has sought to enhance the worth of the man. So, this is the criticism that came forth, and the reply by Kantians were given as the phrase Copernican revolution is not seeking to emphasize the dethronement of man, or in other words, we can also say that the Kantians replied by saying the Copernican revolution, this phase is not seeking to, wound or hurt the narcissism of a man, but it is simply emphasizing on a proposal for a revolution in human thinking as it was done by Copernicus himself. So, like a proposal for a revolution was made by Copernicus, that instead of saying earth is the center of the universe, he said sun is the center of the universe. Similarly, Kant is also proposing a revolution in human thinking by saying that objects go to the mind and it is not the other way round. Question: knowledge is synthetic a priori judgment best seen in dash according to Kant. The correct answer is physics and mathematics. Kant says that synthetic a priori proposition or judgments are most significant in scientific cognition, and as a result they are found in mathematics and science. And this is because Kant stated that knowledge for him is always scientific knowledge, the clearest example of which is found in subjects like mathematics and physics only.